Hello there, and welcome back to my videos on opening strategies. In the last one, we looked at two big strategies. The first one, which was the dangers of early queen moves, and the second one, which was that really special move called castling, where both your king and your rook can move at the same time. I ended the video there, only looking at those two strategies, because they're really important to your opening play, so I wanted to let that sink in. So now that we've gone through the basics of controlling the center, developing your pieces, and getting your king to safety, it's time to combine them all with a review game. As I briefly mentioned in the last video, before being cut off by the Ladia 15 minutes ago, rude, I might add, we're going to look at an important game for review that will help you really understand how to put everything together in the opening. This game will combine many strategies that you've learned over the past two videos and help reinforce the ideas that you've learned about controlling the center, developing your pieces, and getting your king to safety. It may start sounding repetitive again, but those are the three most important things to do in the opening. So I think this example game will be very helpful. The man who played as white was none other than the legendary Bobby Fischer. And he showed the dangers of what can happen if your opponent doesn't try hard enough to control the center. Fischer was considered one of the strongest players, if not the strongest player, from the late 1960s all the way to the 80s. And he's played many beautiful and instructive chess games throughout his entire career. Studying them is an easy way to get better. And that's why we're going to look at this one now. In this specific game, watch how Fischer develops his pieces, controls the center, and almost seems like he easily wins the game from there.
Okay, here we are on the board, ready to take a look at this Fischer game. This game was played almost 70 years ago, right here in San Francisco. Let's get started. So Fischer, as white, starts with knight to f3. This is a developing move with a piece immediately, and it attacks the center. And then after g6, he plays e4. So it's a little bit odd of a transposition to a regular opening, starting with e4, but we get there eventually. And as a side note, transposition in chess is just a fancy way of saying a different move order. Instead of playing e4 on the first move and knight f3 on the second move, Fischer transposed those. Played knight f3 on the first move and e4 on the second move. When we talk about specific opening variations and we go into more advanced topics like that, you'll hear me talk about opening transpositions a lot. Because there are many ways to trick your opponents. You just have to know the openings well enough. We'll get into all of that much later down the road. Let's continue with the game. Black played bishop to g7, white played d4. So already, black hasn't done anything to try and attack the center. He has developed a piece, but Fischer already has two pawns in the center. Black played d6, knight c3, knight f6, bishop to c4. Every move that white is playing is focused on the center, and notice how he's starting to build that perfect setup in the middle of the board. Black castles on the king side, white also castles. Black plays c6. This move has 2 points. First, it adds a defender on the d5 square. And second, it can support a pawn push onto b5 to attack the white bishop. Fischer played queen e2, getting his queen into the game. In the future, he can develop his bishop and get his rooks into the center files as well. It would be totally fine to have developed the bishop first as well, but there's really no rush to do one over the other. Black played knight to d7, and then white played e5. So I have a question for you. Why do you think Fischer played e5 right now? Why is he attacking in the center before finishing the development of his pieces? Well, there is a specific reason for this. Let's take a look at black's last move, knight b to d7. So knight b to d7 develops a piece, but it has another purpose. If we take a look at the squares this knight is attacking, you'll notice that one of them is the e5 square. That is one where black could think about pushing his pawn to e5 on the next move, taking control of the center, and also preventing white from having full control over the center. Now, what was the problem with playing e5 before developing the knight? Let's take a look. If black plays e5 too early, look at how he only has one defender on this pawn, while white has two attackers. Because of this, white would be able to punish this pawn move by capturing it with his pawn first, and then after it gets recaptured, take it with his knight. There are no black pieces that can capture the white knight, so white has just won a pawn. He captured two pawns and only lost one. This is the reason why black is not able to play e5 so early, and must prepare it with the move knight b to d7. Because Fischer realized the threat or black's plan of playing e5, he played e5 himself. He's preventing his opponent from taking control of the center and making a threat at the same time. Now black has to deal with the attack on his knight. He played knight to d5, which is simply a mistake. This knight only has one piece defending it, the pawn on c6, and it moved to a square where two white pieces are attacking it. So Fischer captured the knight, and then before recapturing the pawn on d5, took on d6, just to make sure there was nothing that black could do with capturing his pawn on e5. So he took the pawn on d6, and then captured the pawn on d5. Notice how Fischer has less control over the center, it may look like. He no longer has a pawn on e4 or a bishop on c4, but he has won a pawn already, right out of the opening. So Fischer has a small material advantage going into the middle game. Black plays queen to a5. White plays c4, increasing the control over the center and defending the knight on d5. Black plays knight to f6. Bishop d2, developing a piece and attacking the queen on a5. Queen has to retreat. Knight to e7 check. Notice we don't have to be worried about the queen capturing our knight, because white would be able to take the queen right back. So the king has to move. White took the bishop on c8, and after the rook takes on c8, he played b3, just to shore up his pawn chain and make sure that everything has a defender. Black played queen to d7, queen d3, pawn h6, rook fe1, getting the rook onto the only open file on the game and activating it, making it much more powerful than it was on f1. Black plays g5. Black is in desperation mode right now. His position is worse, he's losing in material, so the only conceivable thing he can see to make this game complicated is to try and start attacking the white king. This is something that we'll get into in the middle game lessons. But Fischer isn't going to fall for this. He plays d5, knight to h5. This move may look like it's just moving the knight to the side of the board, possibly preparing knight to f4 in the future, but that's not it. Notice what changed about the position. The knight went from f6 to h5. You can take a look at the squares the knight wants to go to, but look at what it opened. This bishop is no longer stuck. It's open along this entire diagonal. And what happens to be at the end of that diagonal? The white rook. Because of this, knight h5 actually makes a threat. So Fischer played rook a to d1. He responded to the threat by moving his rook out of the attack. Black plays rook to g8. White plays knight to d4. Queen g4. Queen is starting to look a little bit threatening here. White plays knight f5. Knight f4. Time to be a little bit careful. Black has two threats. The first is to take the white queen for free, but much more importantly, the second one is checkmate. Fischer stops both of these threats by taking the knight and then capturing another pawn. Fischer now has two extra pawns in this game. Look at how every white piece is controlling the center. Even in the middle game, Fischer is still making sure that he has the center under control. Black plays bishop to f6, which actually makes a checkmate threat because it opens the rook and allows the queen and the rook both to look at this g2 pawn. Fischer plays knight takes f7. This is a check, so black has to deal with it. And his only safe square is to block his rook and prevent any checkmate from happening. Fischer moves his knight out of the way to e5. The bishop takes, the rook recaptures, the king moves back, renewing the checkmate threat, and then g3, putting that to rest. The pawns trade, the black rook goes to f8, and then white plays rook to e7, with the simultaneous threat of checkmate, one or two different ways, and also to win another pawn. Black gave up in this position, he resigned, and it's pretty clear why. His king is not safe, his pieces are worse than white's pieces, and he's down 3 pawns. So Fischer is easily going to win this game. Let's return to the main lesson so we can look at some takeaways from this game.
So outside of the opening, this game by Fischer just looked like utter destruction. So what can we learn from this game? What can we learn from this beautiful game that Fischer played and from the mistakes that his opponent made? Well, I think there are 2 main things. First, I want you to remember this ideal setup that Fischer used with his pieces. You have your 2 pawns in the center on e4 and d4. Both of your knights come out into the center. Your bishops get developed into the center as well. And then eventually your rooks and your queen come in too. And once he built up that advantage in the center with all of his pieces controlling it, he can then push forward and start attacking the opponent. And number 2, going off of that, when you control the center, it becomes so much easier for you to make good moves with all that extra space you have and all the extra squares you attack. And it becomes so much harder for your opponent to find good moves, to find a good way to defend, or even a good way to attack, because all of the squares that he would want to move his pieces to are already guarded by yours. So keep that in mind next time you're playing, as this game showed, even at a higher level, how valuable controlling the center can be, and how it can be completely pivotal in winning a chess game, even at the beginning of the game. So what happened in this game isn't always going to happen in your games. You shouldn't think that just because a strong player played this way as black, you're going to have people play like that in every game. If your opponents are strong chess players, they're going to be actively trying to take control of the center away from you. So you're not going to always get this ideal position in the beginning. But your goal should be to try and get as many pieces in the center as possible. Even if you don't get your 2 pawns, both your knights, both your bishops, your rooks, and your queen in there, even if you don't get that ideal position, still getting a pawn or 2 and multiple pieces into the center is good enough to have an opening advantage. Your opponent will be trying to do the same thing. So as long as you can keep the same amount of control over the center or more, you're going to have a fine time in the opening. All right, that concludes the 3 videos I had on the opening strategies. Great job making it through all of these jam-packed videos. I know I threw a lot at you, and I'm hoping that little cutoff in the second one really helped you. If so, kudos to the comment section for helping me out with that one. I hope this review game, along with the videos, helped you learn a lot about what you need to do to play a successful opening. In the next video, we're going to do some practice review problems to help you test what you know about the opening and what you need to work on. But from that point on, in future videos, we're going to start looking at the middle game. It's time to move on from the opening and go to the middle game, which is arguably the hardest part of the game. But we're not jumping too far ahead right away. We gotta do that review first. Until then, this is LRJ Chess, signing off with a checkmate.